Welcome to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. Join me each week as I interview experts who will share the science of sugar, sugar addiction, and different approaches to recovery. We hope to empower you with the information and inspiration, insights, and strategies you need to break up with sugar and fall in love with healthy whole foods so you can prevent and reverse chronic disease, lose weight, boost your mood and energy. Feel free to go to my website for details on my coaching programs and to access free resources, kicksugarcoach.com. Hello and welcome everybody. Today I have with me Dr. Joan Kent, who has her Ph.D. She is a certified health consultant. She has a Ph.D. in Psychoactive Nutrition and a master's degree in exercise physiology. She specializes in ending sugar addiction and binge eating, and didn't get into this field just recently, like many hundreds of thousands of people have. She's been doing this for decades. In fact, one of her amazing claims to fame is that she's one of the very first scientists to actually map the sugar addiction pathway in the brain. She was one of those literally the nerdy people in the labs figuring out some of the early science around why it is that many of us seem to be unable to unhook from refined carbohydrates. Welcome so much, Dr. Kent.
Oh, thank you, Florence. And please, we're going to call me Joan, right, for this podcast, I hope. Maybe not. You decide what you want to call me, but I am so happy to be here with you. And I've been really looking forward to it. So here we are.
Awesome. Well, you have your own story of recovery. You were a woman who unhooked yourself and knows all about the challenges of that and also the blessings of that. So let's start with the challenges. What was it like for you when you were, struggling with sugar? And also, what were some of the biggest mistakes you made in your journey to freedom?
Okay. These are good questions. I'll start with the challenges. This was so long ago that nobody believed that such a thing even existed. I knew that sugar was an addiction for me because I observed my own behavior and I could see that I was addicted to sugar. I could tell that I was addicted to sugar. I could feel the effects that it had when I wasn't around it. And I saw how I was, out of control, eating ice cream. A little bit was never enough. I wanted more. And I don't think they made an ice cream container big enough to intimidate me. I really just wanted more and more. And it wasn't just ice cream. It was just, but this was a problem because nobody understood it. And so I got a lot of judgment, or if I said anything about it, people would laugh, or else they would look me up and down. Oh, she's addicted to sugar. She must be, and they start like checking out my body as if that, I don't know. It was a very frustrating place to be. And I think the biggest mistake that I made was not being willing to let it go. When I made my decision to quit sugar, again, it was still before there were books on how to do it, before anybody was talking about how to do it. When I made my decision to quit, I wasn't really willing to let it go. So there was a part of me that was holding back. And I wanted to find a loophole. Yes, looking for the loophole. That was me. My loophole was some sugar, some food that was sugary that would allow me to consume it and still be in recovery or pretend to be in recovery or something. I wanted all the benefits of recovery without having to go through what I perceived as the agony of getting rid of sugar altogether. So that was the biggest mistake because I think it kept my cravings alive. It kept them going on and on. It took me much longer to quit than it would have if I had just done it right from the beginning, and committed to getting rid of it. So it took me a while before I could do that. And I had some relapses and I learned some interesting things from the relapses though. So, but that was probably my biggest mistake, hanging on. Yeah. hanging on to sugar, wanting to hang on to sugar. And I remember telling a client, there's no loophole, because nobody looked harder for a loophole than I did. And if there were one, I would have found it, but there's no loophole. And her answer was, oh, I'll find it. So I remember thinking to myself, I don't think she's ready. And she wasn't ready. But anyway, that was right.
Oh, and I love that. And I think of the journey of unhooking from sugar, from finding freedom. It takes 3 moments of awakening. I call them, quantum moments or quantum shifts in consciousness. The first one is where we're denying that we have a problem. Oh, I have problems, but sugar's not my problem. I just use sugar because I'm going through a divorce or my job's really stressful or whatever, right? And you just think when that solves itself, my sugar problem will it's the solution to these problems. And then there's this moment of awakening where you go, oh, no. Sugar's a problem in and of itself. And it's also now become one of the most urgent problems. It's made itself to the top of the pile. I need to deal with the sugar problem because there's this primal fear of this getting worse or killing us or something.
Yes.
That's the first sort of moment of awakening, this quantum shift. Second one is where we go, okay, I got a problem. I do, but I got this. I can handle this. I'll just go on this diet. I'll do keto. I'll do vegan. I'll just find a new diet. And if I could just willpower my way through that diet long enough, that sugar-free diet long enough, I'll have solved this problem and everything will be good. I'll get to my goal weight, the birds will come sing and the sun will come out and this will all be over. And then there's, back and forth, relapse, lots of struggle, realizing that there is no perfect diet that seems to remove the compulsion, the addiction. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, quantum shift number 2. I have a problem and I need help. I don't got this. And I don't believe there's going to be a diet that can save me. And so then quantum shift number 3, which is exactly the one you're talking about, is where you say, okay, I actually don't got this. I have a problem. I need help and I need to walk the path of abstinence. And that is the one that takes the longest. And I think we all say that is that being our biggest block to the success of and all the blessings of recovery. Because as long as we're dabbling back and forth between trying to moderate, we sort of get ahead and then we slip back and we never really get the joys and the benefits and the blessings of full recovery. So thanks for that. That was amazing. And in terms of what you see other people, like, do you see beyond those 3 places where we often get stuck in denial? Is there other mistakes that you see people make that you want to talk about that can help them move forward more quickly and more successfully?
You want something different? Well, I think I'm going to say that probably the biggest thing that I see is fear of quitting. Mm-hmm. And no matter where someone falls on the spectrum, giving up sugar scares people. It really scares them. And I have a colleague who actually had a heart attack at a fairly young age. And I know it was because of all the sugar he was consuming. I feel certain that led to that. And he doesn't want to hear anything from me when I talk about food. He doesn't want to hear it. And that's okay. I've learned the hard and messy way not to offer my services to somebody who doesn't want them. But he just, after the heart attack, he got into, I think, exercise, and that's a wonderful thing. Probably lost a few pounds. That's a wonderful thing. And yet he continues to eat the way he used to. And I think, I'm afraid that might lead to a second heart attack. It would be great if the other steps he's taken make sure that never happens. That would be wonderful. But my concern is that it might not be enough. So.
Yes. And it seems to me that, that in the early days of recovery, we think we have a sugar problem, or we think we have a weight problem, probably. And that leads to maybe I have a sugar problem. And neither of those are true. Those are symptoms. We actually have an addiction problem. And if we don't actually treat this compulsive overeating, this food obsession as an addiction, recovery is really hard to get because we keep thinking we just need a diet. And that guy doesn't even sound like he's ready yet to admit that he has a sugar problem, right? Which means that he's going to soon discover, once he starts in on that path, that really the issue is addiction and we need to deal with that. So how do we treat diet differently? Let's say there's somebody who has a bad habit. They overconsume sugar because they are short on time, or they're not familiar with the science, or they haven't awakened yet to the fact that refined carbohydrates hurt us, but they just have a bad habit. They're not truly an addict. So how do we treat this problem differently for people who are truly addicted?
Wait a minute. Are you asking, I'm not clear on the question. Are you asking me how I would treat somebody who just is eating the wrong way compared with someone who's truly addicted?
Yes. That the question is that when you're on the addiction spectrum, how do you solve this problem differently than someone who just has a bad habit?
Bad habit. Wow. Okay. I start by putting good foods in, because my emphasis is on neurochemistry, brain chemistry. And I don't think I know this. My answer to this is evolving over time, because once upon a time, lots of practitioners used to talk about feelings, as if you had to get into the emotions of all of this before you could help somebody get away from sugar. And I'm definitely not saying that feelings don't count, because they do. And I'm definitely not saying I don't care how my clients feel, because I definitely do. But I don't really look for the emotional reasons behind the sugar addiction. I feel as if it's pretty obvious that people get addicted because sugar is addictive. And for genetic reasons, some people are more susceptible to that than others. So if someone is just eating the wrong way, I don't know if you want to call it a bad habit or what, but the first thing I would do is start adding good foods in, because they can change brain chemistry and the person will start feeling different. And a lot of the cravings that they had for sugar and white flour and all of those things tend to go away. There we are now eating the right stuff, and the right stuff is helping us feel better. And then when we don't eat the right stuff, suddenly it vanishes. The way I was feeling, the good way I started to feel, goes away, and people don't like that. So they come back to it. Maybe I should start again from the beginning. Yes, this is a very good thing when they get there. I think sometimes people don't have a really solid handle on that. Am I answering the question that the way you asked it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I basically will start with adding wholesome foods in, and then I don't start analyzing behaviors or lifestyle or life history until they've made a good amount of progress with that. Then when they've, maybe they've already quit sugar, once they get away from it, a lot of the problems that they felt they were having tend to go away. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing, but I find that once somebody gets away from sugar, then many of the things that they were emotionally hooked on sort of goes away when they get rid of or get away from the sugar they were hooked on. And they don't always have to figure out, why this dynamic that takes place, let's say every time the family gets together for Christmas, messes them up and sets them on a binge. Maybe they don't have to do that anymore. And that's a good place to be. So, yeah. But I think if sugar is damaging someone's health and their cognitive functioning and their moods, then they get more mileage out of getting away from the sugar overall than to keep thinking about all the reasons that they have to stay hooked. I can't get through life without this, or my job is stressful. Or, there are great reasons. I know all of them. I know all of the great reasons to keep eating sugar. I was eating sugar like a maniac. And, there was no rhyme or reason. What I know is that there's no rational part. There's no reason and logic when it comes to addiction. There really isn't. You can be as logical as you want to be, but when someone's addicted, crazy things will happen, or they will be called to do crazy things, and then you have to just deal with it. I feel as if I didn't quite answer your question, but you tell me, or ask me another question.
Okay. I will say that my question wasn't very great. What I was talking about is that we don't have a sugar problem. We don't have a weight problem. What we really have is an addiction. And what does that mean when you're not treating, when you're specifically doing an intervention for addiction recovery? And what you were saying is that we start with the food. We don't start with the feelings. This isn't therapy. We don't go into, well, it was my childhood or my stressful job. You just like, let's get the good food in, and then let's stop the behavior.
Right.
We just don't eat at Christmas, regardless of how we're being triggered, or right. And so, yeah, you're answering the question, like, how do we treat addiction recovery differently than you might with someone who comes to say, I have an emotional eating problem, or I have a bad habit of eating sugar, right? It's a different intervention. What makes recovery from addiction unique? And I think you're answering it.
Okay, good. And I would even say with somebody who comes in and says, I have an emotional eating problem, a lot of times that will change when what they eat changes. So if we can get a handle, or help them get a handle on what they're eating, start by eating something better. Again, foods that will change brain chemistry in a good direction, foods that will change I didn't mean to say emotions, I meant to say hormones in a good direction, then some of those emotions will start clearing up. That emotional eating tends to go away when the, I'll call them addictive triggers, aren't there, even though that person doesn't think he or she has an addiction. Some of that emotional stuff will tend to work itself out once we get them away from this triggering food, these triggering foods, plural.
What are the top triggering foods for people who fall on the sugar addiction, flour addiction spectrum?
I think it's usually anything sugary, and that can be sneaky too, because there are a lot of fancy sugars now that people don't consider sugar. And I'm always reading about, let's see, coconut sugar and agave syrup, and what are the sexy new ones? Like
monk fruit.
Yeah, monk fruit and
lucuma.
What was that last one?
Lucuma.
Oh, okay, that's a new one on me. But Manuka honey, and Manuka honey has some benefits. I mean, it can clear up infections, but no matter how fancy they are, they can trigger the same addictive response in someone who's sensitive to this. And it has everything to do with, as you just said before, they have an addiction, and the addiction is not going to care that people are celebrating monk fruit. It's just going to say, yes, thank you for something sweet. I appreciate that. And now may I have more? So thank you. Right. Thank you, sir. May I have another? That kind of thing. So.
Yes. Awesome. What makes your approach to addiction recovery different?
Well, I'm going to say something that I said before, which is my answer to that has been evolving, because I don't think people are as hung up on the behavioral aspects so much as they were. I know I was asked to contribute an article for, and now I don't even remember. It wasn't the American Dietetic Association, but it was something similar to that. And everybody else was writing answers that were really similar, how they would say, oh, there's no such thing as a bad food. And so they legitimize or they legalize all foods, and they say that they're fine. And they were talking about the feelings, and that this is not about the food, it's about the feelings. And I disagree. I think the feelings really are secondary. And I'll say again, I really care how people feel. But I think a lot of that stuff straightens itself out when we work with the food and when we get people on the right track. So I work with the brain chemistry to the degree that I can. But it's like, stick to the science and let's get you quitting. And, and I feel as if that's sort of an Occam's razor approach, or I want it to be an Occam's razor approach, but sometimes it works. Sometimes it takes a little longer for somebody. And
what is Occam's razor? Tell us about that.
Oh, okay. Well, I think of Occam's razor as a principle of evaluation. So when it comes to theory, it's usually done with scientific theories, but I'll take it for any theory, any explanation that has fewer assumptions, fewer steps, fewer conditions, and I usually say fewer moving parts. Anything that requires less of that convoluted type of thinking is preferable to any approach that takes more of them. So, excuse me, the simpler the better. And with respect to sugar, this sounds like some of the stuff we were already talking about. I think you can turn sugar and quitting sugar into a major ordeal if you're always focused on the emotions. And I did read somewhere where somebody said you can't possibly address a sugar addiction unless you've dealt with all the emotions behind it. And I think that's wrong. You're nodding your head, so I'm thinking you agree with me. But let's see. If I look at the brain chemistry, it's kind of this is your brain on drugs. It's as simple as that. Like, okay, this is your brain on sugar. And what can we do? We don't have to analyze every old trauma that might have led to it. And I'll say again that I think when I decide what has somebody hooked on sugar, it's not about the trauma that they've gone through. And many people have gone through some harrowing things in their lives, and I'm not dismissing that, and I'm certainly not making light of it. But we're addicted to sugar because it's sugar. Otherwise, we'd be eating, I don't know, broccoli and asparagus, and say, okay, this is a great thing. If I want a food fix, I'll eat kale. But that it doesn't. There are certain foods that we're led to, and that has everything to do with the brain chemistry. So that's it. This is your brain on sugar. And what could your brain be like without sugar? And that's the exciting part. And to recognize the freedom that can mean, including the freedom from the old haunting things that feel as if they keep coming up and never leave. That's, freedom from that is worth a lot. Don't you agree?
Oh, yeah, I do. And I think we all discover that as we're on our path, that we feel worse for a while, and then slowly we start to feel better. And then there's this turning point when we realize, wow, all that weepiness and those 10 years on a therapist chair, and I just cleared that up in 6 months. Like, not to say that therapy isn't essential. It is. It comes later. When we cleared off all of the moods and the feelings that are coming from dysregulated bodies and brain chemistry. And then that clears up, we become resilient. And then we're like, okay, now I've got my healing work to do, my trauma recovery work to do. I've got my relationship repair work to do. And now you've got a really clear brain and an energetic, strong, resilient body to be able to do that kind of work. And we find that so much just kind of all the little sort of surface upsets just kind of smooth away. They become like ripples, nothing.
Right. So you start with, here's what sugar's doing to you. Here's what you can do about it. And, right now, you don't have to wait again for the therapy. I agree that therapy comes later, and you don't have to wait for that. And I think if you take out, or at least when I picture myself taking out the brain chemistry piece, I think of even the suggestions that people make are not necessarily effective. I mean, I seriously have read these things like, eat some sugar. If you get a craving, eat some sugar slowly and savor it. Well, what is that supposed to do? Slowing it down doesn't change the addiction. It's, if somebody drinks, if somebody's addicted to alcohol and they drink whatever it is, whether it's a hard liquor or it's wine, they're still going to have an addictive response. It doesn't matter if they slow down the drinking. And then I still can't figure out what it was all about. Eat some sugar and then have something healthy. So like, I'm going to eat sugar and then I'm going to have kale. And what is this supposed to do for me? Yeah, I still can't figure out what they were getting at, but I've read these things in articles. Yeah. And the healthy substitute thing is the one that bugs me, because I think that's what keeps people trapped with sugar, because they always want to find a substitute instead of just letting it go and saying, okay, I'm going to quit.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And the hardest part is actually getting ready to let go. And then once you're ready, it's like it comes quickly. The rest,
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
What else do you want to tell us about walking the path of recovery from sugar and food addiction?
What do I want to tell you? Let's see. Well, I think you and I were having a personal conversation before we started this. So I think it has to do with people feeling afraid to quit sugar. What will my life be like? When your whole life centers on sugar, then the idea of just taking this away, I will tell you, this is the truth. This is such a crazy story. The first time I quit, I followed my instructions. I followed my instructions to the letter, and it took less than a week, and I was done. And I felt on that 6th day or whatever it was, I felt as if I could do anything. My energy was off the charts. I had clarity of my mind. I felt fantastic. And I'll tell you the truth, I didn't know what to do with that. I had never felt that way in my whole life. And so there I was, not knowing how to handle it. And I did what I usually do, or did in those days. I had some sugar. Well, the first thing that happened is that energy level went back to a more normal range for me. And I no longer was in that state of super clarity. And I guess I was more familiar with it and it was more comfortable in that regard, but I didn't like it. It's like, wait a minute. 1 minute I was up here and now I'm back down where I normally am. And I don't like that. I don't want to be there anymore. So I went through the whole thing again, took the same amount of time. And the great part is that I committed to it that second time. I did not feel a need to go back. So that was good news for me. And keep in mind, I wasn't following any books. Now you can find 5,000 books on how to quit sugar. I was reading articles at that time that said things like, radio assays were performed on rat brain. And then I was trying to put that together with articles on psychology and articles on low blood glucose and, just piecing this together and trying to make sense out of it. But anyway, I think that's true, that there's fear of getting rid of sugar. But that breaks down into two very practical obstacles. One would be cravings, because cravings do happen. And that leads people back into wanting sugar. When they get a craving, all of a sudden, maybe their willpower just sort of disappears. But I think I'll tie this in with what we were talking about a moment ago and say that wanting to find replacements, looking for those replacements and using them will keep those cravings coming forever. I read an article one time that started with, oh, gee, those sugar cravings never go away, do they? Like, yes, they do. They go away and they go away completely. Haven't yours gone away completely? Completely. But anybody who's writing an article that says they never go away is doing something wrong, as far as I'm concerned. But, what can I do? I'm just reading, and this thing is already out there and being posted. So I think also tying into that and making it worse is the fact that many nutritionists will give their clients recipes. Like they'll take let's say a recipe for, I don't know, brownies. Okay, so they make brownies, and now they're using one of the sexy new sugars, whether it's monk fruit or agave or something, and they're recommending this and they'll even say, contact me at my website and you can get the recipe. It's posted on my website. And so they're advertising and delivering these new recipes with substitute sugars. And I think that all that really does people a disservice, because all it does is keep them locked in, because they're going to get cravings over and over again. And then the other part of this, these are all subdivisions under the fear of getting rid of sugar. The other is fear of throwing away food, or thinking you shouldn't throw away food. A lot of people have this idea. I mean, I grew up hearing from everyone in my family that throwing food away is a sin. Now, many people have heard that, and they used to say, you have to eat this because there are children starving in, and fill in the blank, because everybody heard a different place. Now, I'm not trying to make a joke out of that. We know there are children starving all over the world. That's a terrible thing. And if I think about it right now, I'm going to start crying. And I don't want to start crying about those children, because right now we can't do anything about that. But hopefully we can do something about that when we finish this. But not being able to throw away food is a real trap. This country, the United States, produces, I think the figure is 3,950 calories per day for every person alive, every man, every woman, every child. And that figure, I think that's an accurate figure. Who knows, it might even be more now, but that's more than most men need to eat. It's maybe about twice as much as many women need to eat. And children, they need only a small fraction of that, but that's how much excess we produce in this country every single day. So throwing away food under those circumstances is survival. It's not a sin, it's survival. Get away from that. And when people can't throw things away, that means they're going to have something bad in the house, and they can't say, okay, this is doing me a disservice, I'm going to get rid of it. And I remember a woman in my program who was, she was doing so well. She was right there. She'd been off sugar and she was doing so well, and her weight was coming down and everything was going right for her. And then she went, I don't know, it must have been like Costco, because she described to me the size. I won't even call it a container. It was more like a tub. She got herself a tub of dates, and she was eating them, and she was eating them every single day. And her weight loss, all her cravings came back, and the weight loss just stopped and everything. And I just said, throw the dates away. And she looked at me as if I was crazy. And she said, oh, they're almost gone. And the way they were gone is she was putting them in her body, which was doing bad stuff, but she still wasn't willing to throw it away. So she was going to keep eating them until they were done. That's the clean your plate thing. I have to clean my plate. So here she is cleaning her plate, when the only thing on that plate is this thing that's doing her a disservice every single day. So, okay. So fear of throwing away food, or reluctance to throw away food, is another thing. But these are all under the category of, the fear of getting rid of sugar. So then you've got the cravings that never go away because you don't commit, and then the fear of throwing away food, so that you keep. Wow.
Yeah. I actually remember, I have a clear memory of 18 years ago when I was in 12-step program for food addiction recovery. And I had been, like you, very early adopter in this space. I was in my 20s. I've been on this path for 30 years. I did all the nerdy little research. I literally read this book when I was 20, and at the back, there's all these little sort of references to studies and science studies, right? Early science studies about sugar and its impact on human health and mental health. And I wrote away to these universities, and I was like I was just like you, Joan, like just fascinated with this topic. I couldn't learn enough and fast enough. And anyway, so back in the day, you and I could be completely caught up on all of the books ever written about sugar. Now it's like, I will never catch up in my lifetime now. It's just it's gone explosive. But I remember that 18 years ago, I got into a 12-step program. And by then I had been doing this mostly on my own. And I was eating more organic foods, more whole foods. Like I had figured out a fair bit of it as I was moving along. So my fridge was full of things like organic pumpkin butter, whole grain this, whole food that, organic this, right? And my sponsor said, I will wait on the phone with you while you go through and you grab a black garbage bag and make sure you've got like something to hold it, like a garbage tin or something. And you're going to go through the kitchen, every door, every cupboard, every freezer, I was like, but it's just like, it's $8 a month. So let it go. And it was literally a crisis for me to throw away this perfectly good organic food. It was like throwing away money. It was like literally like emptying my pockets out into the wind, right? And it was so freeing at the end of it. I have never been afraid to throw food out after. And so if anyone's listening to this radio call and nodding their head going, oh yeah, I have that, do it, like throw it all out. It's so liberating. You're just freed from the idea that this food can either be garbage in my body or it can be garbage. Get compost it, give it back to Mother Earth. Say, sorry, I'm not going to need this. Do something wonderful with this, right? And so, yeah, I remember that moment. It was a turning point for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that you're so right about if we can crack the fear and the grief around letting go of this unholy attachment to unhealthy food, we'll realize that there was nothing to fear, that everything that we most want is really on the other side of this addiction. And that it's just an illusion that we're going to be missing out just for the first, 3 weeks or something. We might feel not so great. And Joan, when you said you on the 6th day, you had this burst of energy, you must have been young.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, I quit, let me think. I quit maybe 34 years ago. So yeah, I guess I was young. Well,
because those 20-year-olds, they bounce back in 6 days. And then the 30-year-olds, they bounce back in 12 or 14. And then the 40-year-olds, maybe, 15, 3 weeks or something. And then when you're in your 60s and 70s, you don't wake up on day 6 and feel like Joan felt. I just want you to be realistic about, depending on what decades you decide to unhook. Because I was like that in my 20s too, like 3-4 days of being sugar-free. And I was like ready to, take on the world. And now it's like every relapse, and the older I get, the longer it takes for me to get back to this feeling of, oh my gosh, I feel good. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. The relapses do get more difficult to deal with. You're absolutely right, which is another reason that we should encourage people to stick with it, stay quit, quit and stay quit, because the relapses do get more and more difficult. Every time you have to go through one, it becomes a bigger and bigger thing. Mm-hmm. So we don't want it to be a thing.
Yes. And one relapse can take you into a whole next decade. It can last years before you feel ready again to attempt to unhook, right? That deep inner readiness where you're like,
well said.
Yeah, we've all done it. Awesome. Anything else you'd like to share? Any other wisdom or personal experience you have related to this topic?
Well, let's see. I could actually talk about the upside, like why.
Yeah.
Do that? Okay. So, all right. So I will not say, I can't think of anything the sugar addiction itself did for me. Okay. That was some bad news all the way through. But going through the process of quitting and being in recovery, that has done things for me. For one thing, it led me to my passion, on how basically behaviors and food behaviors and all of that, food preferences. I got an advanced degree in it. So that was an outgrowth of that. I've used this information in speaking engagements, and I wrote a couple of books, and I write many, many articles. And so I have all of that and all of that information. So that is a direct result of having been through this. Like this is something I love to write about. It's still just as interesting to me as it was back when I kind of first discovered it. And I do have overall a greater awareness of food. Like I'm not casual about food. I know which foods to eat and which to avoid. That's just something that we have to do. And I know how to put my meals together. But I think that having been through the addiction and recovery process has made all of that very easy for me. You know, it's like I don't sit around and think, should I or shouldn't I? I'll take one look at a label and just know it. It's not even labels. I thought this was kind of funny, but a woman that I was attending a seminar with handed me something. I don't know, she needed both hands to do something. She said, could you hold this for me? And she handed me a plastic bag big plastic bag filled with trail mix. But this wasn't just ordinary trail mix. This had chocolate chips in it. And I put this in my hand and I felt every cell in my body stand at attention. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, look what's in here. Maybe we'll get some. Well, there was no way. It hadn't even been opened yet. The bag was still sealed up. There was no way I was going to let myself. But you know, it's not even a thought process. It's not even a need to read the label. I can just look at it and say, I feel that reaction in me, and I won't let it happen. And yeah, my ex used to say, you won't tolerate any addictions in yourself. And that was a very true statement. I just, reached the point that I wouldn't tolerate any. And it made me realize that, food is so much more than calories. And it's so much more than any feelings that I had about it. And food was a real thing in my family. And yet I got past that all because of this. If I hadn't addressed this, I would probably still be dealing with all of those things. So I have now a greater awareness of addiction in general and addictive behaviors in general. And so if I have a client who has sugar addiction, I'm not just talking from an academic perspective, like I read this and I have a degree in it. It's so personal, and I can help from that perspective because I know what the person's going through. So
yes.
Yeah, so that's all right.
But really, we could sum it up by saying we don't have to be sugar-free. We get to be sugar-free.
Get to be.
But we are going back to the whole foods that our bodies thrive on. And anytime we put in the processed junk food, it's really a form of trauma. Maybe a little T trauma, and over many decades of lots of binging, it becomes a big T trauma, right? It's damaging to the cells, destabilized to our brain chemistry. It's like nothing about it is good. Now, some people can get away with it, maybe get away with it longer than sugar addicts, but really at the end of the day, we're the lucky ones because we just don't have the option of really dabbling with the junk. We get to be, and we're blessed by the fact that we're whole food women and men.
Yes. Yes. And I would like, may I add a little tiny story about a client who had always been thin. I was training her. This was, a personal training client. And she had always been thin. And as she got older, all of a sudden she was gaining weight in places she didn't know about. And she said, I hate this. It makes me feel ordinary. And what she meant is, she was like everybody else now. She was gaining weight in all the spots. And what I realized at that moment is that because I'd been battling the sugar thing and becoming so aware of the food, a lot of the things that she was probably doing with food and eating that was sneaking up on her, I didn't have to deal with because I had already gone through that. And so there's another thing. There you go. You've used the word freedom several times during our conversation here today. And I want to say that's exactly what it is. It's freedom. It absolutely is. So yes.
Truly is. Like, we are not blowing smoke up your bum. It really, truly is a kind of freedom that is so precious. Like, I just don't think about food. I'm so peaceful. I'm grateful. I'm unencumbered by any sort of troubles with food. It's just, Thank God, it's a wonderful freedom. And I realize I love this. I don't even know where it comes from. I think it might be an indigenous saying. And it's a prayer. And it goes, I'm going to wreck this, but
Okay.
speaking, it goes like this. Something like, may you be the one that breaks the ancestral patterns that keep us from love, peace, and joy. That's shortening it a little bit.
That's beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful? And that's what they would say over the baby. May you be the one that breaks the ancestral patterns that block love, peace, and joy. And I just think we can't get to the work, the recovery work of breaking ancestral patterns, multi-generations of trauma and patterns and limiting core beliefs and, unless and until we've come to the point that you did, Joan, where you're intolerant of addictions because they make the intolerable tolerable. And we don't have the motivation and the space and the brain power and the clarity of mind to go and look at those patterns that have been passed down. Some of them just started right in our own lives. Some of them are things that we just bring to the table, and some of them are multi-generational. And the best part about addiction recovery is that we don't make the intolerable tolerable anymore, and we can't not do our recovery work and stay sugar-free women. And so we have the strong potential of being the one who can break the patterns that block love, peace, and joy. And that's what we all want, love, peace, and joy.
Yes.
Totally. Anything else you want to add?
No, unless you have a specific question. I'm kind of talked out. I've been talking too much.
Not at all. Not at all. I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the highlights that I caught. First of all, you talked about how important fear is, fear of missing out, which drives us to find substitutes that keep us hooked and stuck, sometimes for decades spinning around. You talked about the fear of throwing food away and how liberating it can be to just let it go. Thank it. This doesn't serve my body. You can either donate it or give it back to Mother Earth as compost. You talked about don't start with the feelings. Don't think you need to understand the why you compulsively overeat or are binging eating. Just start with getting the whole foods in, stopping the behavior of eating the refined carbohydrates, do the healing work at the level of body and mind, and then start your recovery work. And you said a really powerful line. There's no good rational reason to be eating sugar. There is no good reason to be eating it. And you reminded us, Occam's razor, simpler the better. Don't complicate this. It's really very simple. You plan your whole food meals, you follow through, you do it one day at a time, move on. That's it, really. Those were some of my favorite highlights. So thank you for that. Joan, tell us a little bit about how people can check you out and find out more about you and what you do.
Okay, let me just put in one small bit of advice. If you relapse, that might happen. It happened to Florence. It happened to me. If you relapse, don't wait till you're ready. Don't wait for that magical moment when you're ready. Just go back to doing what you started. Know what your plan was and just start following it again. Okay. If anyone does want to get in touch with me, I would love to hear from you. My website is lastresortnutrition.com. Obviously, no spaces, just lastresortnutrition.com. And if you want to send me an email, you send it to Dr. Joan, just Dr. Joan at lastresortnutrition.com.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in this week. If you would like more interviews, more information, and more inspiration on how to break up with sugar, go to my YouTube channel, Kick Sugar Coach, or my website, kicksugarcoach.com. See you next week.